welcome to our webinar From Hire to Retire, Rebranding Law Enforcement to Attract the Next Generation. Quick shout out to the Panthers. Nice to see. So before we get started, I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items on the next slide. So first off, don't worry, this whole entire presentation will be being recorded. The slides will be sent to you after this webinar. You'll receive some additional resources, so check your email tomorrow for that. If you have any questions while we're going through the entire webinar, the content, anything, please go ahead and add them to the chat. We will have time at the end for questions, so as long as we have time to get to them, we absolutely will make sure those get answered. And then if you have questions after the webinar, we're always available. We're always here, happy to help. There is our email, contact@powerdms.com, so you can feel free to reach out to us at any point. So let's go ahead and jump in. Quick overview of the content we'll be discussing today. We have three amazing speakers. I am not one of them. I am not your public safety expert, so I'm going to gracefully bow out so they can take the reins here, but they're going to cover the current hiring challenges in public safety and then understanding the needs of the next generation of workforce candidates. Then get into some rebranding strategies that your agency can implement, and then how can you start leading the change. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our amazing speakers and let them dive in and introduce themselves.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. Hey, everybody. My name's Jessica Tyler, and I'm a retired deputy chief out of here in New Mexico. And currently, I'm our general manager of our professional standards suite. During my career, I spent a lot of time over hiring and recruiting efforts, and know that it's still a challenge that, you know, we have faced. I feel like this challenge for decades in law enforcement, but it definitely does have some nuances in today's environment. So really happy to be here with you all today. Thanks for joining us.
Deputy, I'll defer to you to go next, sir, and I'll bring it home.
I'm Deputy Chris Smith. My job title is kind of interesting. I talk about my job description in that very last line that says other duties as assigned, and that is my job. And one of the things that I get to do is background investigator with our agency.
Awesome. And good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Christine Reznicki. I'm a newer addition to the NeoGov family. I left a 14-year career in law enforcement to come over, join the private sector. As is typical in public safety, I wore a lot of hats, and one of those hats was doing background investigations in recruitment and training for 4.5 years. And it was a huge learning process for me when we talk about recruitment and rebranding. So I'm just super pleased to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to you, Deputy Smith, for participating with us today. And we really wanted to start out the webinar today with, you know, why does recruiting and background investigations matter so much for our profession? And it really is about protecting the image, the integrity of our profession, because we all know and we've seen the effects that having that one bad hire can have on not just our agencies, but our communities, and then overall the profession. And so really those lasting, you know, ripple effects can be from whether it becomes something that's on front page news or national news. And I think, you know, a lot of, unfortunately, some of our agencies have experienced that. But again, just that overall decreased trust in our profession as well, that then in turn has the cumulative effect of us having less applicants even applying to join the profession, which is really detrimental to what we're really trying to do. So having good practices in place and making sure that we can have good hires is really instrumental in protecting our profession. And so I know, like I said, that we've all faced those challenges and we want to do a really thorough job, but it's incumbent upon us as background investigators and recruiters that we're trying to bring the correct people into our profession, and that our processes and tools that we're utilizing allow us to not make those bad hires. And so I know, Christine, you feel really strongly about this as well. So love to hear your thoughts on, you know, why this really matters so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of old school. I come from a family of law enforcement, and I'm famous for saying that I'm somebody that honestly believes that public safety and law enforcement in particular is a noble profession. And I had, when I look and reflect, I had the benefit of working for a chief, because it's difficult as a recruiter or even a background investigator when there are vacancies and people are working long shifts, double shifts, getting held over, to just get bodies in the door. And my chief used to, his famous line was he would hold a vacancy before he would just make a bad hire or make the wrong hire. And it's a tough position to be in, but I really respect that kind of thought process about why it matters, and that good hire matters because of that ripple effect it can have.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would just say, let's keep this in the forefront of, like, again, understanding the why. Like you said, there's a lot of pressure on agencies to get their numbers up, to have full staffing. I know I faced that when I was a major at the Albuquerque Police Department, and we were working under DOJ court-approved settlement agreement, and the media was really hounding us on us getting our numbers up, but you don't want to compromise the quality of applicants just to get a number. And so, I would ask everybody attending today to kind of keep that in the back of our minds. We know that that is a challenge, and kind of, putting additional pressure on the processes and tools we use to conduct background investigations and hire people in today's workforce. So bringing us into kind of what are those current hiring challenges, and we know that they're plentiful, but today with, our modern hiring reality, we do know that we are facing a recruitment or an applicant decline, right? And so we see that recruitment decline influenced by, again, some of these can be compounding factors. So we know that there's a higher number of retirements, increased number of resignations, also just the competition we have with our neighboring agencies. And then of course, like we've already touched on a little bit, but that additional public scrutiny, as well as higher liability with things like changes to protections that police officers have been traditionally given. And so the reality of that is, what used to work is no longer enough. And so when you look at all of these challenges together, as well as the changing workforce, which we're going to talk about as well, what are those expectations? We really do have a challenge on our hands. So how can we combat those challenges to increase the number of applicants overall? I think, Christine, you and I talked about like the fact, and when we were doing additional research on this, numbers show that, people are more willing to resign and leave the workforce prior to retirement, yourself included. Like you said, nope, I'm going to make that leap and I'm going to go to the private sector and still serve in a capacity where I'm helping law enforcement. And so we don't see today's workforce as committed, or as, I say committed is probably not the best word, but almost like pressured to stay and get that retirement, or the retirements have changed so that they're not as lucrative as saying like, nope, I'm going to do my 20, 25, 30 years, whatever it takes. We do have a workforce now that's more willing to say, like, if this isn't working for me, I'm going to leave and go to the private sector or go to a different industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we hear a lot too. I hear a lot just in my interactions now that I've left public safety, and it was the same at my agency, how very young they are because of those folks who have elected to leave the profession and not for another agency. They've left it altogether. And then that concept of younger people don't enter public safety like I did with that pension in mind. They can't actually, it's the exact opposite. They can't imagine entering a profession where they're going to earn a pension or they're going to stay there long term. They want that career trajectory. It's just a very different mindset that we kind of have to grapple with and tackle.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think those are things to keep top of mind, that again, what used to work, a long time ago in recruiting efforts or hiring a workforce is different now, and it's changed. And so we have to take that into consideration. Deputy Smith, did you have any thoughts on this that you wanted to interject? Or?
Oh, it's just funny as you guys were talking about how young the crowd is nowadays. I don't consider myself to be that old, but I look at the new guys and ladies coming in, and they could be my kids legitimately. And that's kind of crazy. We just had a retirement today, and he made the comment that the people who are training people today are were trained by people that I trained, and they're trainers now. So you're looking like 3 generations of trainers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And so again, kind of talking more about, we hear a lot about the number of applicants has decreased, but is it real? And so according to a perf survey, yes, the number of agencies seeing a decrease in applicants is more than 50%. 63% of agencies are actually seeing a true decrease in the number of applications. And we already know that we need a lot more applicants than we do positions to be able to fill those positions with those quality applicants. And again, we talked about this a little bit, but more officers are leaving the profession that are joining. And so we're seeing a decreased number of people in the profession overall. And again, like you were saying, Christine, not are they just leaving to go to a different agency, and we do see a lot of that competition between agencies to bring on lateral hires, et cetera, but they're actually just leaving to go outside of the profession altogether. And then I think another key takeaway here for me that was pretty eye-opening is that a lot of these exits, and the majority of them, happened within the first 5 years. So again, not that level of I'm going to dig in my heels and stick with a career. If I'm not happy, I'm more than willing to leave. And again, I think that that's a different mindset of today's workforce than it was, back when I started in the career. And, my dad was a fireman. He kind of raised me to say, like, you are going to get a pension. So in my mind, it was like, there was no option to leave. But nowadays, it's much more acceptable and almost expected that if you're not happy with a career, if you had a rough patch, like, leave, right? We are charged with being happy in our careers. And so we do see that a lot more people are leaving the career altogether, and also with even in those first few years. So again, that adds to the number of challenges that we have in hiring for today's workforce.
Yeah, and I think too that there was a big shift, right around all the events of 2020, when money alone wasn't a priority for someone to stay at a department or work at a particular department. People really started to look for that work-life balance. And if leaving the profession, altogether, whether it's based on staffing, culture, creative ways to kind of incentivize people are electing to leave. So it really does present a whole host of challenges for recruiters.
Yeah. And I think when, sorry, go ahead, Deputy.
So we kind of have an interesting way of looking at that too, with having a jail, and everybody who wants to, the jail's a starter spot, right? Someplace where you can start in the profession. In our state, you don't have to be post-certified to work in the jail. You can get your post and then transition to a patrol position. We don't have enough patrol positions for everybody in the jail who wants to go to patrol. So if they end up going to a different agency for patrol, that's fine. I mean, we don't see that as really a loss to the profession. Although we'd like them to be at our agency. But those ones that are actually leaving and going to a different career altogether, I'm not involved in these conversations, so I can't answer to it, but I know that there's those questions like, what happened? Why aren't you staying in the profession? Hopefully, as we could tweak things down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so things like exit interviews can help us gather that information. The other point I wanted to make here is it's not just a recruiting effort, it's a retention effort, right? So what are we doing to keep people within our organizations once we do hire them, and how do we keep them engaged successfully?
Yeah, and that's a great segue into, the burden doesn't necessarily fall solely on the shoulders of those recruiters or those background investigators, because everybody in that department is, they have contact with people, prospective applicants, they're recruiters. Everybody is the voice of that department. So if they're happy, that culture is in a good spot, people are staying because we worked on retention, then you've got a whole army of potential recruiters versus just, a handful of people that are tasked with it.
Exactly. Yeah. Every employee of the organization should be a recruiter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so really kind of the main focus of today too is really looking at, what do our next generation candidates want or even expect? And so I think that's another thing, right? Today's candidates aren't going to be maybe as docile in their desires. They are going to be more upfront with what they do expect. And so being able to focus on things like flexibility, mental health or overall well-being, shift control, feeling valued. I know we know that this is like a really big one. And then also things like career advancement or changing. So again, having that career trajectory, do I have a career path? Are there other positions I can take? And, you know, out of these different elements, you know, flexibility can be a hard one because we know that it's a 365, you know, 24-day operation. And so what mechanisms do you have within your organization that allow them flexibility? Is it things like how often do you have your shift bids? How long do your shift bids last? What other positions do you have? Things of that nature. And then really, you know, focusing on and providing, again, tools to be and a prioritization of well-being. And again, that work-life balance that so many of this generation people, it's a must-have, right? So it's not even about, you know, can I work just day shift and during the week, but it's other things that, you know, do I have vacation time to take off? Can I do other things? The shift control one we talked about a little bit, but even just if they don't have control over it, do they have visibility over it? Is there a sense, are there ways that you can make them feel more at ease? Again, like how long are your shift bids? How much time do you give them to adjust? So maybe, you know, if your shift bid is takes place in October, but it doesn't take effect till January. That way they have time to plan for things like childcare, et cetera. So there are things that agencies can do, even though we feel like, well, maybe we can't do that or we haven't done it traditionally because you're just expected to be flexible and work when we need you to. There are things that agencies can do to give a sense of control over schedules and things of that nature to help today's workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about what comes to my mind when I think about what the next gen candidate wants is, I was always struck by, and it's kind of been coined, that service over excitement. And I know when we would do a lot of our recruiting efforts, we would have these conversations with command and the chief about, you know, that atypical, these are all our specialty spots, the SWAT video, and then so many people that were coming in the door, they were very service oriented, very community oriented, wanting to get into public safety, you know, to give back, serve their community, do all of what might be considered non-traditional, but trying to balance that with, we want to be service oriented, but there's still duties that we still have to make arrests. We still have to keep the public safe. So.
Yeah, and Deputy Smith, I saw you shaking your head earlier too, just kind of, and you've already commented on, you know, just the younger generation and the youth of some of the current employees. Have you seen a lot of different expectations that they have?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different expectations from the current recruits versus when I started, especially in that flexibility. I think that's one of the biggest ones that is out there. We worked when we were told, and that's certainly changed a lot. And then the feeling valued. Actually, all of these, I could touch on all of them pretty easy. They got to know that the work that they're doing matters, and then they have to see a trajectory for that career. They're not going to be jail deputies their entire career. Where can I go with this? What can I do with this? What can I gain from this experience to take to that next opportunity?
Yeah, and I think really the feeling valued one is one that, you know, I'll say old timers kind of struggle with, because it was like, you know, you're just supposed to do your good job to do a good job. But I know that even those people appreciated getting that attaboy or that commendation or recognition from, you know, citizens or internally. And so we really have to change our culture again within our organizations to create a culture where we are sharing that value and, you know, telling our employees we appreciate them, that, like you said, Deputy Smith, that the work that they do matters. And there's so many different, you know, small ways we can do that, whether it's having events where they get to interact with the community more or in different ways so that they can hear that feedback from the community, but also from our employees within our own organizations, making sure that we do a good job of recognizing our employees and just saying thank you and pointing out the fact that, you know, the work that they do does matter and that they're appreciated.
Yeah,
it's interesting. We do, even for our jail, the way we do our shift bids, we actually shut the entire jail down, lock all the inmates down. Supervisors go and run the jail for a couple of hours, and the shift bid is actually a party. It is a full-blown, I mean, it's a draft party, just as if you're drafting for fantasy league. It's the most interesting thing you've ever seen. Not everybody gets the shifts they want, and everybody knows that, but it's kind of a way to, I don't know, work it out a little bit. That there
Yeah,
can be a
I
little
love
fun
that.
behind how you're picking your shifts and where people are falling. And I mean, there's all sorts of fun things they do on the backside about who's going to land where and who's going to pick which shift, and they turn into a
Yeah,
party. It's kind of interesting.
I love that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, we were talking just yesterday in a group when, I'll kind of focus it on that career advancement and, the next gen candidate, and how we've got a lot of agencies that are what we call very, very young, and that whole culture shift is I was often struck by, my own way of thinking when potential applicants would walk up to a recruitment table and they knew what they wanted. They knew right there they wanted to be the police, but they wanted to be a crime scene tech. They wanted to be a SWAT operator. They wanted to be a detective. And the old culture was, okay, well, slow down. Let's learn. That's a 5 to 7 year, down the road type of thing. Where when we've got these younger departments, it's a culture shift to change those processes, but we can give some of those next gen candidates those opportunities sooner than we might have been able to even 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think that mind shift is so crucial. I remember sitting on an oral board with a group of panelists, and my peers that were with me had been on our department for a lot longer than I had. And I had promoted young, kind of, which was unpopular again. And we had a candidate come in and say, one of the questions was like, where do you see yourself in 20 years? Or what's your goal for your career? And they were like, to retire. And they were like, your goal should be to like concentrate on patrol. And I was like, and so I got like in a nice discussion with our panelists after the applicant had left, because it was that mind shift change about why would you not want them to be looking to have a long career that's going to provide them the retirement? That's showing me that they have staying power. But it was an unpopular answer to some of our other, more seasoned employees who thought like they should just be focused on doing 5-10 years on patrol before they think about anything else. Just take it one step at a time. And so I think that to your point, like people do come with a whole idea of what they want their career to look like. And I think that's great, but it does take a cultural shift sometimes for that, for us to say like, you don't have to do 10 years in patrol before you're capable of doing other positions. And that really only hurts us in our retention measures when we try to put people into a box. So I always told people like, if you have people, support them. Like I would tell our recruits, you are in charge of your career. Don't fall into the trap of, fitting into a box of what everybody else thinks that your career should look like. You're in charge of your happiness with your career. But that is a cultural change and a mind shift for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I own it. It was for me being at backgrounds of recruiting, but also being on specialty spots where we held those processes, just like you said. And I was one of the first ones to say, whoa. They've only been here. We're going to change our process, and it's eye-opening.
Yeah. So as we move to the next slide here, how do we showcase what we're offering to those next gen candidates? And again, I think that this sample that we just pulled up from a recent recruitment ad shows, what's important. And so you really want to be intentional about highlighting what is important to applicants. And of course, that could be different things. So you want to have some variety here, but things like at the bottom of the screen, you can see that educational incentive. It's important for a lot of people to continue their work in education, acknowledging their other years of service. So this particular example is for, looking for those lateral hires, but also highlighting, so showing that you value their time and service. Also doing things like looking at the amount of leave that they get here. So, 14 to 35 days of vacation. That's huge. Paid holidays, sick leaves, personal days, shift differential, weekend differential. So it's like acknowledging the fact that, yes, maybe we don't have all of the ability to take away the fact that you're going to have to work weekends, but we're going to maybe compensate you for those things. And so, again, just showing where they value their applicants, trying to get kind of a connection with the potential applicants of what, you know, life would look like within this agency.
Absolutely.
And so that takes us great segue into, you know, what can those rebranding strategies look like? And so we want to use messaging that really highlights command staff buy-in, again, to show that it's a cultural thing within the organization, that there is that value alignment within the organization, and then incorporate modern tools, right? So social media, that really we want to utilize storytelling, again, so you can make that connection of what does service look like within this organization, and good use of digital messaging. And Deputy Smith, I'll let you talk about your example here of, you know, a great example of how you've used social media in this kind of storytelling.
Yeah, so we actually have some great storytellers in our PIO, public information group. They also do a lot of this other kind of stuff. But like you mentioned earlier, where everybody's a recruiter in your agency, my agency happens to make it really easy for all of us to be recruiters for our agency. We've produced quite a few videos. You can go look at them on our YouTube page that talk about the different types of things that are unique to our agency. Like in this case, we really highlighted some of our female deputies during Women in Law Enforcement, and what it's like to work here as a female. That's a big thing, is to try and get, you know, the whole half of our population to be interested in what we do, and why work for Montgomery County. Another big one that we did is on tattoos. Our agency allows them. Some of our nearby agencies do not at all. Any visible tattoos are not allowed. We do allow, obviously they're tasteful and all that other kind of stuff. They can't be offensive, but as long as they're not, and the unique connections that makes between the deputies and the community, the individuals that they're encountering, a lot of times have tattoos as well, and they can talk about them. They're meeting people where they are. So it's just a lot of those little kind of things that we've highlighted that are kind of unique to our agency. And then again, just the agency making it really easy for the rest of us to be recruiters like this. I hit, repost and put a little one sentence with it. And then this particular deputy and I get to give each other a hard time about who gets to work with who.
Yeah. I think the beauty of this too, and we used to do it in my jurisdiction, and it didn't really hit me until I took a step back, is they would do weekly or bi-weekly spotlights on an officer where you kind of learned a little bit about their history, their education, their personal interests, and it would vary the spectrum at all levels. And what I love about that is there are potential applicants out there that may see themselves in that person. There may be a young woman that sees herself in this social media post and relates and takes that step and says, that's an agency I want to work at, or a young man that just sees themselves in that spotlight. And that's huge.
Yeah. The other thing I love about that, Christine, is not only does it give you that marketing tool of, like you said, reaching potential other applicants, but it's also working on retention by showcasing your current employees that what they do matters, and kind of showing how each, person's an individual, but that they're large, a part of something larger within the organization, but also kind of giving them a little moment in the spotlight is, to me, that's a win for everybody. So I love that strategy.
I agree.
And so again, being very intentional about that rebranding, right? So your marketing matters both in pictures and words. And so again, it's not just still print, right? It's not just your ads that you're doing for your testing processes. It's things like Deputy Smith just showed. And, how do you guys present yourself in an agency on platforms like LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook, et cetera. But being intentional about the way we market our agencies is really crucial, and something that's very easy for us to control. And so what I loved about this example is, one, it's again showcasing females, and I swear, like, it just so happened that Christine and I got to do this webinar together, and it was just recently, National Women in Law Enforcement Day. But again, making sure that your community sees these positions as accessible to all people within your community. And then here too, I love the fact, like, just the words of these headers here, lead change in your community. It's not just about, like, taking bad guys to jail, but it is about being able to change and make your community a better place. And then, the other main header there is more than a job. And at the very top, it's cut off a little bit, but it says a career beyond the badge. And so it's really looking at like kind of that holistic service that we provide in law enforcement, instead of just being a little bit more narrowly focused, where you still see, some ads where it's maybe just like the SWAT truck and, the quote unquote, like cool jobs of like, banging down doors and driving fast, et cetera, which of course are still really fun aspects of our profession, but it is more than that. And so making sure that how we portray our agencies is being more inclusive, if you will, or just also more holistic in the impact we can have on our community. And so I think that, this is a great example of that. And if you just kind of read through, again, some of the language that they use, I think, it's pretty telling about, creating real change in the city you call home. Again, just showing that you are going to be tasked with, but also given the ability to shape the community where you live.
Absolutely.
And so how can we either lead the change within our organizations or influence, our leaders within our organizations to help us lead this change for rebranding and really just reaching out to these next gen candidates? And so things like, allocating a budget and being, again, intentional with our recruitment strategy are really important. So having things like a recruitment plan. I know, a lot of accreditation programs require this, but outside of that, I see oftentimes this is something that, agencies just kind of hope for the best. Like, okay, maybe we have a recruiter. We know that we're going to be doing testing X amount of times, but do they actually have a written recruitment plan? And how are you going to ensure that you are recruiting people that are representative of your community? So again, showcasing, different races and ethnicities, as well as including, females and males in our marketing materials, and how we advertise those is extremely important. Also things like application accessibility. Back in the day, I remember you used to have to, and again, I'm dating myself here, but you used to have to go, to a substation and pick up an application packet. Or now times you might see like where it's only available online. So really, are you meeting applicants where they are? Are you making both types of things accessible? Or maybe instead of the, moving away from paper processes, do you have tablets or a kiosk within your different substations where they can apply online if they don't have access to Wi-Fi or, internet access in other places? And to be mindful of things like how often and frequent and how long are your testing cycles? Is it taking you 6 months from the time that somebody fills out an application to get them through the process? And what can you do to reduce those testing cycles? And then looking at that continued communication throughout that testing cycle with the applicants, making sure that they understand the process, and then also looking at continually improving and evaluating your processes. And so I know that that's a lot to kind of take in right there. So we can take a little bit of time to talk about those components more. But Christine, I know you had some thoughts on really like, especially this, intentional recruitment strategy idea.
Yeah, and it's funny that I'll come back to that, because the first thing is testing cycles is just easy. When I came to recruitment and training, we kind of had 2 academies, that summer academy, that winter academy, and we had 2 testing cycles. And 50 people said they were going to come, and then maybe on the day we would get 10. That was when we kind of took that shift and stepped back and made it continuous. We set aside days in the week when we did PT tests, when we had that application open. And I think it's not just transparency, it kind of works hand in hand with your process and recruitment, is have it out there. Someone comes, have it accessible. If someone comes and they're interested in working in your agency, what can they expect in the process? They're going to apply, but what's next? Are they going to have that PT test? What does it include? Because those are a lot of questions that I know for me, 10 and 14 years in, I just assumed it was known and it was assumed. But a lot of folks, even though it might be out there, they want to understand the process. They want to feel comfortable with it. And if they can't get to an actual person and you're not accessible, having that out there so that folks can see it and kind of prepare and plan is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And just like you're saying, the accessibility to the information that's going to be required for them to be successful, right? So like even having things like, what are your disqualifiers, the automatic, again, trying to make sure that they're not wasting their time or the recruiter's time. I know Deputy Smith, like you talked about this some before, having kind of candidates assess their own viability for candidacy within your organization is important. But again, that's dependent on us providing that information to them so that they can know. One of my pet peeves used to be is like somebody failing the PT test. Like when it was, because I'm like, it's all out there, right? You should not show up on test day and have this be your first time that you're running the mile. Or doing a sit and reach or doing push-ups. Like you should know whatever the test is, and those things should be practiced. But again, having that information available to the applicant so that they know what to expect is really important. And so a lot of it is incumbent upon the agency to provide this information to our applicants so that they can be successful.
Yeah, and I think too, what I started to learn and what we hear when we think of policing in the 21st century, or what 21st century policing is like, you've got that, what a traditional applicant looks like. Are we hitting those military job fairs, those colleges, and then kind of that shift towards what are the like knowledge, skills, and temperament of that more service-oriented 21st century police officer, and where do we find those folks? And for us, some of those folks were just found by our engagement out in the community. A manager at Chick-fil-A, where everybody went and ate because they got the discount when they went to Chick-fil-A, and they built a relationship with a manager there who got to know the officers, had an interest in becoming a police officer, was engaged with a recruiter, and ultimately applied, went to the academy, and is working the road now, and transitioning those skills, which might seem non-traditional. She was a manager at Chick-fil-A. It's not like she took that career path that a lot of folks often do when they want to be the police, and she's applying all of that to being a police officer, and that's huge. And if you can, I think, how do we replicate that? Right. Over and over again. Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm kind of a prime example of that non-traditional. I mean, I came from the business world. I have an MBA. And I was mid-level management, and the opportunity, I knew somebody who worked for this agency, and he's like, you need to come work here. You need to come work here. You ask me about it all the time. You need to come work here. And the opportunity presented itself, and decade and a half ago it happened. And I still do the same thing now. I talk to people that they show a little bit of interest. I mean, a lot of people know what I do for work. They ask me questions, hey, any interesting stories lately? And I'll do what I can to kind of, quit asking me about them, come experience them with them, with me.
Yeah. And I think both of those, again, are great examples of everybody's a recruiter. And really, that's, I think, such an empowering thing for anybody within a law enforcement or public safety organization to say, how can I lead this change? It starts with each individual, right? We can all be a recruiter. We can all share our stories. We can all take the time to answer questions or get to know people that we interact with to help increase the number of applicants and eventually great employees that we have within our organizations.
When it comes to recruiting too, we have a lot of competition with some great agencies in our area. And making sure, like on the testing cycles, we have cycles just like everybody else does for hiring, but off-cycle hiring. I mean, if there's somebody we really want to work here, and it's just not their timing's not perfect with our hiring cycle, we'll do off-cycle hiring if we can. We've also done a lot of effort to make sure that we can reach them where they're at. How do people in this day and age communicate, including people like us? We text. So we have a texting system. Multiple people can get into us. It's not just on one person's phone, and we can reach them where they're at via text, not emails, not phone calls. They want to text.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think, that's a great segue to this too. And, this can be even our communication methods can be something that we include in our recruitment plan even as well. So what does a good recruitment plan look like? And I know that this is something when I'm still working with agencies here in New Mexico, specifically around like accreditation requirements, I feel like this is something that a lot of agencies struggle with, because it's like, okay, well, our recruitment plan is to recruit. Like, what more do you need than that? Like, right, we just want good candidates to come apply to our agency. And so having a recruitment plan can really help keep the agency on track and keep focused, and also keep things timely, because we all know, if we blink a quarter, 3 months goes by, 6 months goes by, a year goes by. And so Christine, like you kind of talked about like what your testing cycles were, and you had those 2 academies a year. And I know when I was at Albuquerque Police Department, because we were in such a deficit, we had to change things, and we had to have like things like overlapping academies. How can we make that work? Or maybe we do more frequent testing cycles to hire people earlier so that we're not losing them to other jobs or other agencies. And so different things that you can include in your recruitment plan are, who are you trying to recruit? Do you have a specific group of people that you're trying to recruit? Of course, this usually starts with people that are representative of your community, because they have ties to our community. They're going to resonate well with the people that they're interacting with, and it should contribute to longevity in their careers there because they have ties to the community. How often are you going to hold testing? And again, does that maybe need to be a little bit flexible depending on the number of applicants you get, in a certain testing cycle, et cetera. And then where are you marketing that you're doing this testing? Is it just on a website? Is it easy to find? Are you using social media to get it out there? Are you still doing things like job fairs? How else are you going to get the word out, especially if you do decide to change things or hold additional testing? Or, sometimes we would do things like a special weekend testing for people that had traditional jobs that didn't want to take time off, or maybe you do an evening testing. Other things to, again, make it easier for the applicants to actually get their foot in the door and start that process. And ultimately, who's responsible for executing the plan? And like you said, Deputy Smith, right? Is it like another duty as assigned? Is it somebody specific? I know a lot of organizations don't have the resources to have somebody specific over recruiting. And so then what person, what manager level or command level position is going to be tasked with ensuring that the plan is actually executed? And then how often do you want to review that plan? Again, just to keep us honest in being more diligent about it, because it's very easy for time to get away from us, just in general, and then especially with how busy public safety agencies are these days. So I think that this is always a good starting point. And again, it just makes us be more intentional with our recruitment efforts within any organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of touched on where my head went when we talk about accessibility and testing. And you said, on the weekends and in the evenings, I think to some extent, they're not entirely gone, but gone are the days where, hey, if you want to do this, it's this time on this day, and you've got to be here, or else wait months for the next testing. And when you're trying to like engage and those college students that are getting that criminal justice degree, or somebody that's working, it's not always convenient. We had to be flexible with late in the day tests for interviews and PT to accommodate for schoolwork and jobs.
Yeah, and we did like some accelerated testing cycles. So we did things like they could come on a Saturday morning, we would do their PT, their written, and then we would have X number of slots available even to do psychological evaluations or polygraphs for people, especially if they were traveling a little bit. So we would have a certain number of designated spots available to really have a compressed testing timeline for some of those applicants if we needed to. Yeah, lots of different ways you can be creative to make accommodations to increase the number of applicants that you're getting. And so another segue is to, how can we utilize different tools and technologies to help us with our recruitment processes, including doing backgrounds. And so specifically, we want to hear from you, Deputy Smith, on kind of the story of how your sheriff's office has utilized technology, both to help things be more efficient and smoother for applicants, as well as you guys as the background investigators, and for your admins and supervisors. How has that looked for you guys?
Sure. So I'm fortunate to work at an agency that values technology and is super open to different ideas and how can we leverage it to do better. With Vetted, I mean, we had our old processes, paper, PHS forms, fillable PDFs. The world is way past those, but that's where we were stuck. With Vetted, we've been able to transition into fully electronic PHSs. Benefits us in huge ways. I can actually read them, which is always great. I'm not trying to read somebody's email address and try and type it into my email and that kind of stuff. It's really easy to get to. And then just that mobile access. It's designed to be done on a phone. How much filling of forms do we do on our phones anymore? The vast majority of what I do on my personal time is on my phone. So making it work on that is a big deal. And it's a positive impression of our agency and what we're doing and what you'll get once you're here in terms of technology. It's that first little thing of what they see about how we do business and how we run things. And if we're sending them an old PHS form on a fillable PDF, it's not always the greatest impression. But then the great thing too is we can watch what they're doing. We used to send out PHSs and cross our fingers and hope we'd get it back. Now we can sit here and watch it and know exactly what's going on, how many of the modules they've filled out, if they've completed it, all that kind of good stuff, which is great because now we can follow up with them. A lot of times it's kind of surprises me how many of them fill it out and it shows completed, but they don't actually hit submit. And I always wonder how many times that happened when they were doing paper ones, and we just didn't know it.
Like the classic case of the kid doing their homework, but they don't turn it in.
Yeah.
But now you can see it. Yeah.
Prime comparison. But being able to call them up and like, hey, or text them, hey, we see that you finished it. Are you going to submit it? What's holding you up? Anything we can do to make that happen. And then also when they do submit it, we know how people fill out forms. They're not always the greatest, but it's really easy to tell them that, hey, we need you to be a little more clear on this. Hey, we need a little more detail on this, and send it back to them, and they can finish that little bit for us and resubmit it. And back in the olden days, the background investigator would get that, and we'd rely on the investigator. In our agency, we have a background coordinator, and she's the one that does that initial review of the PHS and sends it back to them if they need to add a little more detail or something like that. But the ability to do that within the software is a huge benefit to us. And I mean, just to address that flexibility, we have it right now. It actually happened that our background coordinator had a family emergency and had to step out. But that ability for me to actually step in and also do that for her, so she doesn't have to worry about work right now. She can tend to what's going on in her life, while we can actually step in and just pick right up where she left off, and there's no real big difference of what's going on. And then time savings with AI, we've really started to embrace that. There's some built-in AI, but we've also gone out beyond that. There's all sorts of tools out there now where we can use AI to kind of speed up those processes and do things. Like a lot of our investigators, when we were transitioning to Vetted, were kind of worried. They're like, is this going to replace me? Well, no, it's not. We still need investigators. We still need somebody to actually go out and do the work and talk to the people and all that kind of stuff. But what's your least favorite part about doing a background? It's writing those stinking summaries. I know for me, I hated it. Absolutely hate writing summaries. So how can we leverage tools to make it so that part's easier, hopefully speed up our process, and get better work product? And we've spent a lot of time focusing on how do we get better, faster, cleaner, more consistent work product across the entire backgrounds.
And it's something that struck me as you were describing that, when we think back a couple slides to that want for candidates to feel valued. It's, you know, whether intentional or not, that seeing that incomplete PHS and making contact with an applicant to say, hey, we saw you completed it, you know, are you hung up? Can I help? Right out of the bat, you've left somebody with that, you know, feeling valued, feeling like, hey, they saw this, they reached out, they made contact, instead of this, it's just kind of out there in a void. And so you really almost kind of set that first, hey, I feel valued right out of the gate, and I'm just applying, completing my paperwork. Is this an environment or a culture that I, you know, want to continue to be a part of? You know, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. And so much of, you can see here, the successes or where it's improved processes for you guys really lend itself to, you know, increased efficiency, but also just that visibility, accessibility. And again, not just from the applicant, but for the employees within your organization as well, and having, you know, that view into where are our bottlenecks potentially within our process? How can we have better cycle times for our hiring process? How can I have, you know, more legible applications so that our investigators aren't having to spend time with that? So really love all of these kind of highlights here of how it's helped you all in these different from these different personas.
Yeah.
So with that,
to revamp our reporting process and how we're reporting to command staff and supervisors about where people are and where we're losing them, and you know, whether they're disqualified or they dropped out or all this other kind of stuff. We're reporting that better than we ever have up to the decision makers.
yeah, which is great, because that data or those analytics can help us drive decision making and what changes we need to make with our processes, or even potentially, you know, qualifications, et cetera, how we handle our hiring process, which I think is great.
Yeah, and even that recruitment plan, you know.
Yeah, exactly. That feedback, the feedback loop to the recruitment plan is great. So just some key takeaways for you guys today. We want to leave a couple minutes for some Q&A, but the key takeaways we really want you to walk away with today are, you know, being able to identify your current hiring challenges. Of course, we highlighted some today, which probably resonate with most of you, but we know that each organization, each geographical area, even two agencies in the same geographical area might have different challenges. And so again, being open-minded to really digging in and identifying and facing what your challenges are head on, and then use that to drive how can we rebrand our agency to address those challenges. Maybe we're addressing the challenges, maybe we're actually highlighting other things that might work for our agency. And so again, making sure that it works for the individuality and that culture of your organization. And then leading the change, again, making sure that we're having conversations with key stakeholders to be intentional about our recruitment strategies, identify these challenges, you know, control the things that we can control for our application, and be more particular about having a recruitment strategy and doing that through your recruitment plan. And again, this isn't a one and done thing. This is a continuous cycle of improvement, just like so many things within public safety, that we're going to take that feedback and continue to evolve and adapt with changes and challenges as they occur.
Thank you to the attendees for taking your time to come and join us today. We're very happy that you could make time and stay with us. And please feel free to reach out if there's anything you need, any other questions for us. We'll be happy to answer those, and hope you all have a wonderful week. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.